Well, good afternoon, everyone. I don't think I've ever had a welcome just like that. It's really nice. I could get used to it. So if you were in the audience for Sue and Alan's presentation, you'll spot some common themes here. And I guess that's to be expected. And for me, that's really reassuring, because I think there are some common themes. OK, so where should I begin? So for the last year, I've been setting up a process improvement team at Insight Investment. And what I want to do today is just take you through my thinking and take you through my approach. And if you're just at the beginning of this journey, then hopefully you'll take away one or two things that might be useful to you. So the fact that we're all here is because we believe in business process management. And I guess you're all big supporters of Bizagi's product. But I wouldn't mind leading off with a question, which is just to ask, do any of you use any other BPM tools anywhere within your organization? I mean, just a quick show of hands. So one person. OK. Well, that's interesting. Maybe that just means I've had particularly bad luck. So at my last company was a European investment bank. And we used 3 separate BPM tools. We used 4 RPA vendors. And we were being advised by 5 different consulting companies. And when I came to Insight, I said to myself, there must be a better way of doing it than this. OK, so as I said, I came to Insight about a year ago to set up the process engineering team. And this is a center of excellence. I don't really like that term, but that's what it is. And it's our job to drive a wave of process improvement and process automation across the company. Just a little bit about my background. My first degree was actually in artificial intelligence, so it's been very interesting to hear about all of these product announcements. I feel like I have quite a history in this area, although it's way back when, in the dark days of computing. Yeah, I've worked across a number of industries. I began in defense, moved into investment banking, and I'm now in asset management. And I've held a variety of roles, but for many years now, I've worked in process improvement, operational excellence, and strategy. So who is Insight Investment? Well, we're an institutional asset manager. So we manage the assets for institutional clients. So these are pension funds, large corporates, local government authorities. And we cover a range of financial solutions, but what we specialize in is something called liability-driven investing. And this is where we provide certainty in meeting future liabilities. So imagine you're the manager of a defined benefit pension plan. That's what you really care about. Can you meet your liabilities? And to do that, we have to work very closely with our customers. In fact, we've been known to work with some customers for a couple of years before we actually start doing any investment management. So we're not in the business of developing generic products and selling those to a mass audience. But what we do is develop highly tailored solutions that meet specific client needs. And we're very good at it. We've been growing consistently since 2002 in the value of the assets that we manage. And it's not just me saying this. I don't know if you can read that slide, but the industry recognizes that we're a leading player in this market. But all of this growth over the last 15 years, that's really introduced some challenges. You know, when you're a very small company and everyone's an expert and everyone knows everyone else, you can do incredible things. As you get bigger, that becomes a lot harder. Now, we're close to 900 people, so that expert knowledge has become diluted. We've had to organize our staff into big kind of functional departments. But of course, many of our most important processes span across those departments. And like many companies, we use email to move work around the organization. And we rely on spreadsheets to try and track the status of work. So as we get bigger, we're beginning to experience problems of transparency. We just can't see where the work is. And those handoffs from one department to the next, because they rely on email, they're not as reliable as we need them to be. OK, so So I realize I should have shown you this slide earlier. That this is a summary of what those challenges are. And really, I guess there was recognition from the board that we had an increasing level of operational risk in our processes. And that was the reason I was originally brought in. But what I didn't want to do was just put in sticking plaster solutions. I didn't want to put in manual controls, a 4-eye check or a 6-eye check. This is a problem that would really benefit from business process management. But the trouble with business process management is that, well, best practice is that you should have a center of excellence. I mean, if you look at Forrester's research, they say, if you have a center of excellence, you maximize your chances of success. For me, because I wasn't part of the technology team, creating a center of excellence introduced some challenges. It was a new organizational group, and it had to establish a role for itself inside the company's existing ecosystem. So that's always felt like launching a startup company. And startup companies don't have it easy. So this breakdown is based on a post-mortem of 101 failed startups. And I think we can take those top failure reasons and translate them directly into the challenges that I was going to face setting up a center of excellence. Firstly, I would need to make sure that whatever service I was providing was a really good fit for what my market needed. I'd have to do something that no one else was doing or wasn't doing very effectively. In terms of execution, yeah, absolutely, I would need to be effective, but I'd also need to be efficient. I don't know how many of you have read the Tech Genome report, but they did a survey of 3,200 startups. In 74% of the failures, the startup had tried to scale too quickly, typically growing its team too big, too many roles, too much hierarchy. And finally, competition. Now, Insight is a really collaborative company, but there's always competition for internal resource inside any company. And I thought that the idea that the rest of the company would sit back passively, waiting for me to add value, well, that was really naive. My real concern has always been that another initiative would be launched somewhere else within the company, not necessarily overt competition, but just some other initiative, maybe a robotics initiative that wasn't taking into account what I was trying to achieve with BPM, but would make what I was doing more questionable. So as you can probably tell, and my wife would tell you this as well, I'm a kind of glass half empty sort of guy. But I think it's good to think about what can go wrong. So, and it's really informed the approach I've followed. So what have I done? Well, I can describe that in 3 ways. How I made the case for the Center of Excellence, what I've actually set up in terms of structure and governance, and finally, how I operate on a day-to-day basis. So taking each of those in turns, you have to understand what it is that your internal market needs, because every company is different. Now, I spent a lot of time when I began working with different internal stakeholders, understanding the history of the company and what the particular challenges were, what the culture was of the company, what the problems were that needed to be fixed. And it was really important to sift apart the symptoms we were experiencing, so things being late, things being missed, things being disputed, from the underlying root causes. Now, the root causes are problems of definition, problems of data inconsistency, and lack of integrity in our processes. It was also really important to establish a shared vision for what we wanted to achieve. So at Insight, it's not about cost reduction. What we need to do is get much better transparency around our processes and much better integrity in the end-to-end flow. But what we also need to do is make ourselves more nimble. Now, the asset management industry is going through unprecedented levels of change. And any company or any organism has to be able to adapt more quickly than the external environment is changing. You have to be able to jump up to that next S-curve. So I put a business case together that covered 3 streams of work, and I'll talk about those in a moment, and that was enough to get my senior management backing to proceed. But in many ways, that's just like a startup company getting VC funding. It's a great result, but it's no guarantee of success. So the very first thing I did was establish some best practice principles for process management, process improvement, process mapping. And I shared those across the company. Now, this was a way of extending the influence of the Center of Excellence before it even existed. We ran an RFP, we selected Bizagi. I was saying to Gustavo earlier, I feel even more confident about that decision than I did last year. That doesn't mean we haven't had challenges along the way. We've had a number of infrastructure and security challenges we've needed to address, but I think it was the right choice. I've always wanted my Center of Excellence to operate on a commercial basis, so we defined some simple services that we would provide, and those services were geared towards what my internal market needed. And the purpose of the service was to set expectations around how long it should take and what the outcomes should be. It was a way of building that knowledge within my stakeholder community. So I've built a very lean organization. And when I say lean, I have 5 resources onshore in London, and I'm growing a team of 5 in India. I would rather start off with a small team and have people try to give me extra resource than be perceived as sitting on a big cost base that's a burden to the company. I know that once we start delivering applications, it will be very easy to make the case for additional headcount and resource. In terms of what that organization looks like, I have a couple of people focused on process improvement. You know, they come from an asset management and Lean Six Sigma type background. I have a Bizagi solution architect who's sitting in the audience. I won't embarrass you, Stoyan, but Stoyan has been invaluable because he's helped to set technical standards and identify reusable components, and that's key to improving our productivity as we go forwards. I then have 2 BPM leads, and their job is to work onshore with the different business areas, gathering requirements, doing initial prototyping. And in time, how this will work, they will each face off to 2 developers offshore. So we will create, if you like, 2 development pods. And what I'm encouraging those development pods to do is to act very independently, to experiment, to try different things out, to really feel empowered to experiment and see what works most effectively. In order to ensure that I'm pointed in the right direction, I've set up a firm-wide governance forum. So this is a set of people that are reasonably senior, but not so senior that you can't get any time with them. They've all been appointed directly as board-level delegates. And we meet on a monthly basis, and we've set a set of principles to ensure that they collaborate so that they come up with an overall decision about what's the highest priority for the firm. Because every company is different, and I didn't know at the outset what would be effective at Insight, what would work well, what would be valued, I've set a monthly operating rhythm. So every month, we present our results to the governance forum, and we use that as an opportunity to revalidate that we're still working in the highest priority areas. So I take a lot of comfort from knowing that even though I'm constrained in terms of resource, but I'm pointed at the highest priorities for the business. We front-end any development work with some good quality process analysis. I've still got Michael Hammer's mantra, ringing in my ears, don't automate, obliterate. So we take pains to make sure we don't implement anything that doesn't make sense. We're agile and iterative, of course, but actually, in truth, we're still learning what that really means in the context of BPM. I think what sets our approach apart is that I'm trying to be what I call breadth first. So I'm trying to cover as much of the company as possible, as quickly as possible, at a reasonably superficial level. And there are 2 reasons for doing this. Firstly, I don't know where the biggest risks are in the company. So I want to lift as many sort of manhole covers as possible to see where the alligators are. But secondly, if I can touch an area, it gives me a foothold, and it makes it that much easier for me to come back and add more value later on. So it's me being defensive and, yeah, I guess protecting against other people trying to move into my benefit space with another competing initiative. And finally, in terms of marketing, with a powerful tool like Bizagi, in principle, you could implement anything. But if I'm not careful, I would end up in headlong competition with other established technology teams. We actually have a lot of good technology at Insight, but what we don't do very well is stitch together these interdepartmental processes. So that's my niche. That's where I can add value, and all of my marketing messages support that. Okay, so I mentioned there were 3 work streams. In a company like Insight that's been evolving organically for the last 15 years, where nothing has really been written down or described explicitly, before you can improve anything, you have to discover what your processes are. So we have the tools to assemble the stakeholders, to map out and scope the boundaries of processes and map those processes out. And in doing that, it's very much like shining a light in different parts of the organization. And what that's allowing us to do is to build up a current state landscape of all of the existing processes and what the interdependencies are. It's very much like reverse engineering the company. In parallel, what we're doing is developing an enterprise process model. So this is a top-down model that starts with value streams, how we deliver value to clients, and then the supporting processes that underpin those value streams. So it was interesting. When I turned up at the company a year ago, the only description of Insight that existed was the organizational diagram showing who reported to who up to board level. So I think this process library, the enterprise process model, will be a nice complement to that. And then finally, we implement business process management applications. Now, in truth, we've only really just started that journey. We only got our resources on board in June. We've delivered 1 application. We're about to deliver another 2. At this stage in Insight's evolution, even simple workflow applications add tremendous value because they give the transparency of the process and they give the integrity. What was interesting for me when I turned up, none of the stakeholders I dealt with were talking about robotics or predictive analytics or natural language processing. So I've always known it's only a matter of time before they are talking about that. And so I've seen that I have a window of opportunity. And so what I'm trying to do in that window is cover as much of the firm as possible and get a foundation of BPM in place so that I can then build on top of that. And then finally, the great thing about having business process management is that we get a rich source of data about our processes. So often, process improvement is held back because you just don't have any data about your processes. So this becomes a virtuous circle. This is like Deming's continuous improvement cycle. So I said we're breadth first. So what does that actually mean? Well, we take the highest priority area from our organizational backlog, and our objective is to find a way of delivering something within 2 to 3 months. So regardless of the complexity, how can we design it so that we can, with certainty, deliver something? Now, our very first application was a really simple travel request application. Our second application, in comparison, was horrendously complex. And Alan, you made a point earlier about it's important to tackle the big problems. We've all heard the mantra, think big, start small, learn quickly. But actually, it's important to tackle problems that really matter. So what can I say about this? Yeah, so this process, client mandate change, this is when a client wants to change some aspect of their investment management. It kicks off a whole bunch of activity within the company. We need to evaluate the business feasibility. We need to work out how we'll calculate our performance, how we'll calculate our fees. We need to draft and execute new legal documentation and then make all the changes in downstream systems. So this is a process that involves upwards of 20 different teams. And honestly, best practice would probably say you shouldn't touch it. But it was strategically important for the firm because if we make a mistake, there's enormous reputational damage and the potential to lose significant amounts of money. So I had to find a way of scoping this process to make it achievable to deliver within 3 months. And essentially what we did was map out the full process to get the full end-to-end breadth, but then keep the functionality as shallow as possible. And the benefit of following that approach is that we can then allow teams to actually use the products that we deliver, rather than go into an extended design phase where you're using people's intuitions. We gather actual feedback on what works. And what this illustrates, I have this phrase where I talk about not all benefits being equal. There's a precedence to benefits at Insight. The primary benefit that we're going after is risk reduction. That's the most important thing for us to achieve. And then after we've done that, we can come back and look at capacity hotspots, and then think about techniques such as robotics then. Okay, so branding and marketing. I love the name Bizagi, and I love what it stands for, but you wouldn't believe how much trouble we had in the company pronouncing that. I actually thought it became a standing joke. So Bizagi, Biyaji, Bijazzy, Bijeezy, one person said. Yeah, but I tell you what, even if everyone had pronounced it properly, we still would have done this. We created an internal brand name, Ava or Eva if you're English, and it's good to have an identity, but actually this was an opportunity for us to get across a message, which is that this is not a one-off project. What we're doing here is a continual cycle of evolutionary development where we're making our applications a better and better fit for a business environment that's constantly changing. In terms of getting this message out, I've made extensive use of our corporate intranet. This was a bit of an underused resource, but I've taken every opportunity to publicize the niche that we're operating in, how we add value, and what we're currently up to. Okay, so what have I learned? I've restricted it to 4 points. There's probably, I could probably go on for 4 slides of things that we've learned. The first point is, if you want to go breadth first, you have to be very careful about scope creep. And Alan, again, I think you made this point. Especially if you're starting with a simple application, the temptation to keep adding features is enormous. But there's an opportunity cost of doing that. If you add more features to an application, it's effort that you could be spending somewhere else in the organization. With our complex processes that span multiple functional areas, you always come across experts who have very strong opinions about functionality that should be delivered. Now, if I'm honest, in our client mandate change application, we probably accommodated more of those requests than we should have done. But the risk that was always at the back of my mind is that if we over-design something, that initial release might be more complex than the process they currently have, and that would be the worst possible outcome. And in a way, it's related to the next point. So, Alan, I keep referring to you, but you made the point about process ownership. You need, well, as the point says, you can't please everyone. Okay, so you need a process owner that can make those casting call decisions about what will be included, what will be omitted in an end-to-end process. Now, the trouble is, we don't have process owners, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Until we deliver applications that can provide visibility of an end-to-end process, then it's very difficult to get someone to take on that role. But I think this is something that's going to improve. We will, as we deliver our applications, as we provide that visibility, we will get people to adopt the process ownership role. And then the final point is a little bit embarrassing to admit, but with problems we've had hiring into India, we haven't had the resource we needed. With a few technical infrastructure challenges along the way, the team has been quite stressed. And the one thing that has slipped, that's been compressed, is our effort going into change management. So, our first release was quite a soft release where we deployed to production, and then in parallel, we started the whole process of training our users. I'm very confident we will get better at this as we proceed. Okay, so to sum up, maybe because I was the new boy to the company, maybe because I was working outside of the IT organization, But the parallels between me trying to create a center of excellence and trying to launch a startup were always really apparent to me. So I've tried to act like a startup. So I've tried to think about, well, what is it my market really needs? What's the niche I'm operating in? How can I operate efficiently? And how can I anticipate threats as well as opportunities? I really do believe in this mantra, start big, think small, learn quickly. However, I also know that unless you're working on problems that actually matter to your company, then you do run a risk that what you're doing will just be seen as irrelevant. So you have to tackle problems at some point that really do move the needle for the firm. Every company is different, so you need to find a way of learning what works in your company. For me, I've tried to do that by adopting a monthly frequency, so I maximize my opportunity to get feedback. And sort of related to this, I'm adopting a very defensive attitude. I want to get that foundation across the company because I really honestly believe that you will only get maximal benefits from a tool like Bizagi once you've knitted the whole company together. And I think it would be a great shame to develop a deep product in one particular corner of the organization and lose the potential to have a solution across the whole company. So yeah, I'm trying to go breadth first across the company and then build on top of that. And then finally, if you've looked at what your company needs, you've identified your niche and you've defined your services and you think you're delivering those services to the best of your ability, then don't forget to tell people what you're doing. So I've been reminding people again and again and again. Thank you very much.